Today at 6, UK-wide rules on what we can do over Christmas. The four nations reach an agreement. A Christmas like no other we've had in living memory. Up to 3 households will be able to mix over 5 days across the UK.
All the governments agreed that we should balance the need to protect public health with also allowing people to be with their loved ones.
The decorations are not in vain. With a month to go, families up and down the country can start planning.
I love Christmas, and it's the only time of the year that I get everybody together. So it is very important.
And ministers warn of the risks involved. We'll be looking at them. Also tonight. Schools may be open, but how do they cope when 1 in 5 students is at home because of COVID restrictions? Why should leaseholders have to pay for cladding defects they didn't know about? MPs say the government is wrong. A concession in all but name. Donald Trump finally tells officials to prepare for a Biden presidency.
And coming up on BBC News, Manchester United will attempt to redeem themselves in their return match against Istanbul Başakşehir later. They lost 2-1 to the Turkish champions 3 weeks ago.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. With just a month to go before Christmas, ministers from England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have this afternoon agreed on broad UK-wide rules to allow families to gather for Christmas. In the last few minutes, the Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove said they needed to find a balance between allowing people to meet loved ones and the risks involved. There was a reminder today of those risks. 608 deaths were reported in the latest 24-hour period, the highest since May. Now, there may be slight differences across the nations, but here's what the new Christmas rules will look like. Up to 3 households will be able to mix in each other's homes. That does not include hospitality settings, and rules around support bubbles are different between nations. Families will be able to cross national borders to celebrate Christmas, and these new rules will be limited to a few days either side of Christmas. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
Christmas is coming, and ministers and officials from the UK's 4 administrations had some very big decisions to make about families meeting up over the festive season. The aim has been a common UK-wide approach, and Scotland's First Minister earlier indicated that extreme caution was required.
We will continue to ask people to err on the side of caution. Our overall advice will be for people to use any flexibility carefully and only if they believe it right and necessary for their personal circumstances.
And late this afternoon, the agreed Christmas plan was set out.
For 5 days, from the 23rd to the 27th of December, people will be allowed to have a Christmas bubble. And that means that 3 households can get together so that families can enjoy something closer to a normal Christmas.
This is not an instruction to travel, it's not an instruction to meet with other people. People should still use a sense of responsibility, should still ask themselves whether what they are doing is keeping themselves and other people safe.
Kent has 2 council areas in the top 10 UK hotspots for virus infections. So how do local people see the next few weeks?
I'd like to mix at Christmas, but I can see I may not do it.
Everybody just wants to get back to a sense of normality, but we've all got to be patient, haven't we?
I think, really, we should have all been locked down until January and then start the tier system.
Restrictions will be reimposed after Christmas, but for how long?
Is it possible that we could be back to normal after Easter?
After Easter, we think that we will be getting back to normal. Now,
so what will that mean in practice?
Those damaging social distancing interventions that have big downsides, whether economic downsides or social in terms of our well-being, I should hope that we can lift those after Easter if these 2 vaccines are approved by the regulator.
That's what might happen in a few months' time, but the NHS is having to cope right now with the consequences of COVID infections. The number of patients with the virus at Cambridgeshire hospitals has trebled over the last 3 weeks, and there are staff shortages because of illness. There's concern what might happen if case numbers escalate again.
I don't really think this lockdown's really felt like a proper lockdown as it is, because everywhere's still very busy. But yeah, definitely when the rules relax and the numbers go up more, we're definitely going to struggle a bit more, I think.
Some seriously ill COVID patients won't survive, and daily death numbers may continue to rise. One way at looking at the COVID impact is on total deaths from all causes. This grey line shows the 5-year average for weekly deaths in the UK. And here's what's happened so far this year. The red line is COVID deaths. And just in the last month or so, it's taken the total above the average by 19% in the latest week. But that's still quite a lot less than in the first peak. The total is more than 100% then above the average. And once the vaccines have been rolled out and restrictions lifted, the number of excess deaths throughout the pandemic will be the best benchmark of how the UK has fared compared with other nations. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
And our deputy political editor, Vicky Young, joins me now. Vicky, this has all been happening just in the last few minutes. I just wonder if you could flesh out some of the details for us.
Yeah, and it's details that people are going to want to know about, isn't it? The governments of the 4 nations think they've come up with something that is proportionate, that will relax the rules. But I have to say it is only a bit. This is not going to be a normal Christmas, and the message really is still to be very cautious. So as we know, it's 5 days over the Christmas period from the 23rd to the 27th. Now, for Northern Ireland, there will be a day extra either side. That's particularly because of travel. And it will be 3 households that can mix. Now, in England, that means that if you're already in a social bubble with somebody, that counts as 1 household and you can join with 2 others. Now, that rule will have differences across the 4 nations. That bubble must be fixed for the whole time. You can't change the bubble from one day to another. And again, crucially, you can gather in private homes. You can gather in outdoor public spaces and places of worship within that Christmas bubble, but you cannot go together to hospitality venues. So as I say, this is not going to be a normal Christmas. And the message very much is to really use your own judgment, to be careful, particularly, of course, around the vulnerable. And also important to say there are some exemptions, if you like. If you think about students, a family might have 3 or 4 children who are students. They will all allow to become back home for this period. And of course, children whose parents are divorced, they will be able to be in 2 distinct, separate Christmas bubbles.
Vicky, thank you very much. So while these new Christmas rules offer some clarity, it's still going to leave families up and down the country agonising over what to do. Many have been hoping for a get-together, but are also worried about protecting vulnerable or elderly relatives. John Kay has been meeting 2 families in Devon.
All Sam wants for Christmas is Christmas.
It's the only time of the year that I get everybody together. It is very important and it is special.
She's desperate for her children and grandchildren to see the tree inside and to celebrate like they do every year.
It's not the presents or anything else, it's having all my family around me. That's the important thing. Even if it's only just for one day, just to let families get together to enjoy Christmas.
And what about the risks to public health of people mixing?
I think that's the problem. People cannot go silly. They have to be sensible if they want to do this. Otherwise, we're just going to have a really rotten January. Little gatherings would be okay, maybe, hopefully.
It's a big decision for politicians and for families right across the UK. Some say it should be up to individuals, not governments. Others say it's wrong to prioritise one religious festival.
Hi, Dad.
Hi, Nay, how are you?
I guess this is what Christmas might be like.
If this is as good as it gets.
Naomi and Roy are resigned to an online Christmas. They've decided not to make their usual trips between Devon and South Wales, even if it's allowed.
I'd love to do it, but no, I will be advising them that that's not a good idea, especially as I feel like there's so much hope with the vaccine development. Just seems like it's too high risk, regardless of what we're allowed to do and what the rules say.
How do you react to that, Roy?
The only thing that's missing is the physical contact. And if that has to be, then I would rather miss out in 2020 if it guaranteed we could do what we normally do in 2021.
But he'll miss having fun with his grandkids. Looking a little bit Santa Claus there, Roy, maybe, with the beard?
You're not the first one to call me that.
It's all about family. Family and making memories.
Tonight, Sam is hopeful, building a grotto in the garden, planning for the Christmas she's been dreaming of. John Kay, BBC News, Plymouth.
As we've been hearing, any easing of restrictions over Christmas will come with added risks. The government's scientific advisors are warning that transmission of the coronavirus is most likely when people meet indoors. Our science editor, David Shukman, has been looking at the latest research on transmission and what we can do about it.
It's traditionally the time of year for celebrations, but when friends and family crowd together and maybe relax about COVID for a while, the coronavirus can easily spread. And scientists say that scenes like this can lead to infections.
The way that we would normally experience Christmas, a Christmas meal, for example, with our friends and families, is probably the worst possible scenario for this type of virus. It's going to be difficult to physically distance. People care for each other. They're not used to that.
If you're out of doors, all the evidence suggests you're very unlikely to catch the virus because it gets dispersed in the open air. But at this time of year, no one wants to spend too long out in the cold. This is, after all, the season for gatherings indoors. But that brings a whole series of risks. In any group sitting down to a meal, it's possible someone may be infected without realising because they have no symptoms. And the more people there are, the greater that danger, especially if they've come from different households. One risk is from sharing, because dishes or bottles could be contaminated as they're passed around. Another is that if someone is infected, they'll release the virus as they talk, and more emerges the louder people are as they project their voices. Hour by hour, the longer everyone's together, the more it can accumulate in the air. And if the windows are closed against the winter cold, there'll be no fresh air to dilute the virus, again increasing the chances of infection.
By opening windows regularly throughout the day, you can remove the infected particles.
So the government's advice is to open windows, which might make the room colder, but should clear the tiny virus particles known as aerosols.
Hands, face, space.
There is growing evidence that if you are in a poorly ventilated space for a long period of time with people who are infected, that you may be breathing in those aerosols, and that might be one of the routes of infection. And especially in a social setting where the chances are you're not wearing a face covering.
So the guidance is to reduce the numbers getting together and maybe save a big gathering for the summer. Avoid sharing plates and utensils. The American government says everyone should bring their own. And keep the event as short as possible. But even with measures like this, the elderly and other vulnerable people may still be at risk. So there's a Christmas balance to strike between the chances of infection and the benefits to morale. And getting that right won't be easy. David Shukman, BBC News.
Now, the latest government figures show there were 11,299 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That means the average number of new cases reported per day in the last week is now 18,295. 1,654 people had been admitted to hospital on average each day over the week to last Friday. And 608 deaths were reported. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. That means, on average, in the past week, 442 deaths were announced every day. It takes a total number of deaths so far across the UK to 55,838. Keeping children in the classroom has been one of the key goals for the government, but it's a policy which comes with enormous challenges for both pupils and staff. More than 1 in 5 secondary school students in England was out of school last week because of coronavirus. In fact, the latest figures show just 78% of teenagers were in the classroom, the lowest level since September. Before the pandemic, 95% attendance was normal. Our education editor, Bramwell Jeffries, reports from Knowsley on Merseyside, one of the worst affected areas this term.
Even break times carefully managed. A school hit hard by coronavirus. Teachers and pupils having to isolate.
In year 10 we've had to have bubble closure, an entire bubble closure. In year 11 we've had a partial bubble closure. There's a significant number of days that have been lost as part of that.
Across year 11, just since September, more than 700 days in the classroom lost.
Even now we're still just catching up with work that we missed during lockdown, so there's still a lot of content that we need to catch up on before learning the content that we should be right now.
I don't think it's really fair because at the end of the day we're all sitting the same exam and some have had more time in school than others and it could affect people differently.
As someone who's self-isolated already, I think it's really stressful to even think about the fact that we've possibly got to do exams in a few months' time.
You won't be learning all the content that will be on your exams, so it not only affects your GCSEs but also college.
In this part of Merseyside, as many as 4 out of 10 teenagers have been out of secondary school at any one time. Now, local infection rates have improved very slightly, but those are still days in the classroom those teenagers won't get back. And schools are worried that if there's more disruption after Christmas, they simply won't be able to cover all of the content of their GCSEs. Plans for exams promised soon. One suggestion, grades could be more generous than usual across England.
It's exactly the same as reducing the content for everybody. What we need is a more localised approach. It's take into account the exact nature of the disruption that we faced.
With one more baby we could have managed, but not with 2.
In English, pupils will have more choice in exam questions. Some want it allowed in other subjects.
You could have different papers that cover different parts of the content, or you could have a single paper but guide pupils through the questions that they should answer based on the content they've studied.
How high would you put the risk of the government getting itself into a very difficult position again?
At the moment, I think that risk is very high.
As they try to keep cases at bay, unions warn more pupils may need to learn at home. Ministers determined schools will stay open come what may. Branwen Jeffries, BBC News, Knowsley.
And the time is 17 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. COVID restrictions will be eased for a few days over Christmas across the UK. And still to come, the retired military dog who received the highest honour for bravery in Afghanistan.
Coming up on Sports Day on BBC News, Glasgow City have been drawn against Sparta Praha in the Women's Champions League last 32. It's the 10th season in a row the team have got to this stage of the competition.
The Chancellor Rishi Sunak will set out details of his spending review tomorrow. As part of a package of measures, Mr Sunak will announce a new 3-year £2.9 billion scheme to help 1 million unemployed people look for work. It comes as the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Labour's Andy Burnham, warned that the north of England was facing an economic crisis worse than the 1980s. Here's our economics editor, Faisal Islam.
A year ago, before the pandemic, before the lockdown, before the sharpest recession, it was places like this, Middleton, that the government said it would be judged by. This seat in Greater Manchester, part of the new Blue Wall. The promise to level up the economy will feature in tomorrow's spending review, but here some locals are yet to see change.
We were promised like a metro link for 15, 20 years and it's still not happened. It's one of those, so it's promises are made, it's actions more than what words.
As much as we can believe Boris Johnson's promises, of course, well, yeah, given time and given patience by everybody, yeah, we can still level up.
And the regional mayor here, Andy Burnham, who's clashed with government over the COVID lockdowns, says levelling up has to mean something concrete for living standards.
The north of England has been hit hardest by COVID because of the failure to invest in the north over decades. And we've probably gone backwards this year. We've been levelled down. We could be looking at another period like the 1980s in the north of England coming out of the COVID crisis. The 2020s could even be worse than the 1980s. So that is the test facing this government, and it's still unclear whether or not they're going to pass it.
At the spending review, the Chancellor will announce a new £1 billion a year restart scheme, hoping to protect and create 1 million jobs. But spending reviews are also meant to set a long-term course. Tomorrow, a first, a national infrastructure strategy, spending more, particularly beyond London and the South East, welcomed by the chair of the National Infrastructure Commission.
This national infrastructure strategy, the first time we will have ever had one in this country, is a golden opportunity to set out our determination to get our policies right in these areas. Every economist in the world almost at the moment is saying that governments should be investing in their infrastructure despite the impact of COVID.
The COVID crisis has obviously fundamentally changed the numbers. The official forecasts tomorrow will show the economy shrinking in this year by more than 10%. That is bigger than any single year during the world wars, during the interwar depressions, in fact, for 3 centuries. That has had a knock-on effect to government borrowing, where it has spiralled close-ish to £400 billion, 15 to 20% of the size of our economy, and that has not been seen in peacetime, only ever seen during world wars. So the levelling up problem is bigger, our ability to deal with it now more constrained. Tonight, the finishing touches being put to a review, still needing to rescue the economy as well as reset it for the long term. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Organised criminal gangs have been abusing the universal credit system as rules were loosened to cope with a rise in applications during the coronavirus pandemic. Officials told the BBC they've stopped as much as £1 billion of taxpayers' money from being paid to fraudsters. Well, our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan joins me now. So they've uncovered some of it, Michael. Is there a suspicion that there's a lot more?
There is a concern there's a lot more. I've been told there are more than 1 million applications for universal credit within the system that still need checking, and there is a concern that some of them may be fraudulent, although the applicants may simply not be eligible for the benefit if, for instance, they've applied for some other COVID government support schemes like the self-employed grant. There is also concern that the highly automated universal credit system didn't spot this particular scam. It was stopped effectively by a junior civil servant working with high street banks who noticed that dozens of applications for the benefit were being routed towards the same bank account. Now, that led to further investigations which revealed more than 100,000 fraudulent applications for universal credit with gangs using stolen identities. That then led to officials calculating that as much as perhaps £1 billion may have been paid out had these scams been successful.
All right, Michael, thank you very much. Now, the High Court has ruled that the American woman alleged to have killed Harry Dunn in a road accident last year was entitled to diplomatic immunity. The teenager died after being injured outside an RAF base in Northamptonshire. Anne Sakoulis, who was accused of driving on the wrong side of the road, was allowed to leave the UK after he died. Duncan Kennedy reports.
Harry Dunn was just 19 when he died in August of last year. He was knocked off his motorbike here by an American woman driving on the wrong side of the road. She was Anne Sakoulis, who left Britain 2 weeks after the crash, claiming diplomatic immunity through her husband's job at an American airbase. Harry's parents, Charlotte and Tim, have tried to get Mrs. Sakoulis to come back. But after reviewing the case, the High Court today ruled that Mrs. Sakoulis did indeed have diplomatic immunity. It's a decision that's left Tim and Charlotte profoundly disappointed.
We've had many tears and tantrums, but we've kept our feet on the ground. We've already launched an appeal. You know, she cannot move on, surely, with her life in a wholesome way without facing up to what she's done. She openly admits what she's done. So come back, face the courts, get it over and done with, then move on.
And yeah, we can close this for everybody.
The Foreign Secretary said the judges had made the right decision today, but that he felt sympathy for Harry's parents.
There'll be no solace to the family of Harry Dunn. My heart's with them. We've made clear right from the outset we're on their side. We've called and we continue to call for Anne Sakoulis to return home to face justice.
So where does this all leave Harry Dunn's parents? Well, today's decision by the High Court was undoubtedly a setback, but they say they will appeal. They also say they'll ask Joe Biden to intervene when he takes over the presidency. In a statement tonight, Anne Sakoulis' legal representative said and would like nothing more than to find a path forward and to provide the family some measure of peace. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News in Oxfordshire.
You wouldn't know it looking at Donald Trump's most recent posts on Twitter, but it does seem as if the president has finally got round to accepting that Joe Biden did win the US election 3 weeks ago. He's authorised officials to start cooperating with Mr Biden's transition team, a process which would normally be well underway by now. Our North America editor, John Sopel, joins me now from the White House. So tell me, John, has he finally accepted defeat?
George, the great gift that Richard Nixon and the Watergate era gave the English language was the non-denial denial. Last night from Donald Trump we got the non-concession concession. In a series of tweets he said, the fight goes on, we will prevail, but he also said this: do what needs to be done with regards to initial protocols. That sets in train the setting off of the transition process, where Joe Biden is going to start getting daily intelligence briefings to bring him up to speed. Officials will be able to meet with the Joe Biden team to talk about some of the priorities in government. They're given money, they're given office space. So, no, not a surrender. The stars and stripes are still flying above the White House and not a white flag, but a process has been set in train. Now, Donald Trump is trying to row it back to say that I haven't conceded anything. I go on to fight. But the process of this election is marching on. Pennsylvania has confirmed its results today. So too has Nevada, Michigan last night. And there's less and less space for Donald Trump to breathe. He called an emergency news conference within the last hour, but just to talk about the stock market.
All right, John, thank you very much. A committee of MPs says government attempts to pass a law that would make leasehold flat owners pay for building defects such as flammable cladding and fire safety defects amounts to an abdication of responsibility. Their highly critical report says nobody believes leaseholders should pay for historical problems exposed in the wake of the Grenfell Tower fire, except the government itself. Our Consumer Affairs correspondent Sarah Corker reports.
A bombshell has just been dropped on us with this cladding.
Caught up in Britain's building safety crisis.
These sums of money are absolutely eye-watering and something that we could never afford.
Hundreds of thousands of people are trapped living in unsafe homes. These flat owners in Salford are now facing crippling repair bills.
And if I'm made bankrupt by this, I lose my job, my career and my home.
When they bought apartments here at Millennium Point and Tower, they were told they were safe, but fire safety defects have been found behind the cladding. Fixing it could cost millions. The Grenfell Tower fire exposed serious failings with building regulations. New laws are coming designed to remedy those flaws. But a critical report by a group of cross-party MPs warns the legislation fails to protect leaseholders from spiralling costs. The Housing Select Committee concluded leaseholders should not pay anything towards the cost of remediating historical building safety defects. It said the £1.6 billion Building Safety Fund will prove insufficient, and in the short term, the government must foot the bill.
Just up there on the left.
Back in Salford, Paul and Jake were first-time buyers at Millennium Point, and they welcomed today's report.
Ultimately, we purchase properties in good faith, and the buildings overall either change in regulations or they either weren't built correctly to begin with. So how is it fair that them costs fall down us? And it's great that the voice has finally been heard by the Select Committee.
We don't have that money. It's very difficult for anyone in our kind of situation, like a modest-sized flat, to have that sort of money.
Clive Betts. In the Commons today, the Housing Committee chair described government support as totally inadequate.
To make all high-rise buildings totally safe and remove all defects, the total bill could be as high as £15 billion, and leaseholders should not have to pay that.
In response, the Housing Minister said he could not guarantee that all leaseholders would not have to contribute.
We cannot write an open cheque on behalf of the taxpayer. That would send the wrong signal to developers and those who are responsible for these buildings that they do not have to pay because the taxpayer will.
But 25 Conservative MPs have expressed concern about the government's proposals, and across Britain, people are living with the constant uncertainty of who will pay to fix this crisis. Sarah Corker, BBC News in Salford.
And finally, a retired military dog has received the highest honour for animal bravery after saving soldiers' lives in Afghanistan. Kuno was shot while tackling a gunman on operations last year. The Belgian Shepherd dog ran through gunfire to intercept an Al-Qaeda insurgent. His injuries led to him having part of his paw amputated, but Kuno is now making the most of his retirement thanks to a pair of prosthetic back legs. Today, he's joined a select group of 72 animals to receive the PDSA Dickin Medal, the animal equivalent of a Victoria Cross. Well, it's time for a look at the weather now with Matt Taylor. Matt.
Thank you very much, George, and some more good news. For Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, the view out the window, not quite as soggy over the next few days, something brighter on the horizon. And it's not the only change. Today we saw temperatures widely around the 12-degree mark across the country. Pretty mild for this stage in November. By the end of the week, though, some of us will be even struggling to get to around 5 Celsius as overnight frost and fog return. At the moment, though, the coldest conditions will be pushing into the north and the west as the rain gradually clears away from Scotland and Northern Ireland. There will be a few showers later, turning wetter to the north and west of England and Wales overnight, staying dry to the southeast with some clear skies, and it's across England and Wales where we start on another fairly mild note. But that mild air will be getting squeezed away as our cold front pushes its way eastwards slowly. The colder but bright conditions moving into the north and west throughout. So Scotland, Northern Ireland, bright today for you. Sunshine and a few scattered showers, brightening up to the north and west of England and Wales through the day, but staying fairly cloudy. The Midlands, Channel Islands, southern England and the southeast, as well as East Anglia. It's here where we can see some rain or drizzle keep going. Temperatures still in double figures, but elsewhere dropping down into single digits. And what will follow will be the return of overnight frost quite widely. A cold night through Wednesday night into Thursday morning, with temperatures close to, if not below, freezing. And we'll see some dense fog patches in Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland and northwest England too, where they linger through some valleys. Temperatures will struggle to around 3 or 4 degrees. But for most of you, Thursday, a lovely, crisp, sunny autumn day. Bit of patchy clouds still through the English Channel, bit more cloud to the Hebrides later, but temperatures more widely into single figures. And it will certainly be a case of deploying the big coat, the ice scraper and also the fog lights as we see the week out. Fog becoming more of an issue, the overnight frost will stay there and it stays chilly into the weekend, but for many it's looking dry. George.
Matt, thank you very much. And that's all from the BBC's News at 6, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we can now join the BBC's news teams where you are.